This program was made possible in part by the Port of Los Angeles, America's leading container port and the first port in U.S. history to handle more than 7 million containers a year. The Port of Los Angeles is committed to balancing growth and development with a broad-based environmental program and diversified community outreach.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Davidow, and I'm speaking to you from the Institute of the Americas on the campus of the University of California, San Diego. Welcome to Encuentros. Today we are joined by President Alvaro Uribe of Colombia, who is visiting San Diego. And we have with us also Robert Caldwell of the San Diego Union-Tribune. President Uribe has kindly granted us an interview, and we're going to be talking to him about Colombia, Latin America, and the world today. Bob, why don't you begin?
Mr. President, you met with President Bush earlier today. Can you give us some idea of what you discussed?
First, thank you for this interview and my greetings to the viewers. It was a very positive meeting with President Bush. The United States is helping Colombia a lot. In the year 2000, Colombia had 180,000 hectares of illegal drugs. Thanks to Plan Colombia, we have seen a reduction last year up to 80,000 hectares, and this year we are making much more progress. In addition to spraying, we have introduced manual eradication and alternative crops. It is very important to destroy illicit drugs in Colombia because these drugs fund terrorist groups, and the help from the United States is not a rhetoric help, it is a practical help. Other point in our agenda is the negotiation of the free trade agreement between the countries of the Andean community and the United States. In the Indian community, Peru, Ecuador, and my country, Colombia, have created a group to negotiate with the United States. This was other point we talked about with President Bush this afternoon in the warm reception he gave us in his house in Crawford.
Mr. President, Peru, Ecuador, Venezuela, the countries of the Andean region, with the exception of Colombia, are in very bad shape, politically and economically. You do not have to agree with that, but would not Colombia be better off trying to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United States by itself and not wait for these other countries to be in the position to do it?
As a brother of our neighboring countries, I have to say to you that I am optimistic about the future of the countries of the Andean community. I want not to make comments about any one of them separately, because there will be many aspects to be taken into consideration. Colombia has to work as a member of this group. Last year, we finished negotiations with Mercosur. 3 years ago, many people in the region considered it was an impossible dream to reach. Now we have signed the agreement, and we are under the application of the agreement at this moment. And I am hopeful that we will reach this agreement with the United States.
Good. Bob?
Mr. President, you ran for office in 2002, promising or offering the people of Colombia more security and less violence in their society. Give us a sense of how your government is doing in fulfilling those promises?
We still have many problems, but we are improving. For instance, in the first year of my administration, we have a decline in homicides of 20%. Last year, the second year, we have a new decline of 15%. And this year we are having a new decline of 20%. In kidnapping, the first year of my administration, we have a reduction of 27%, the second year of 35%, and this year, in comparison with the same period of the last year, we are having a reduction in kidnapping over 60%. There is a lot of work to do to solve this problem for good, but we are going in a positive tendency. Unemployment in the year 2000 almost reached 20%. Last June, our scoring unemployment showed a percentage of 11.4. We have seen a huge decline in unemployment. Foreign direct private investment has come to Colombia again. Some years ago, Colombia had only $600 million per year. Last year, we got over $3 billion, and this year we are expecting to have over $5 billion.
And what sort of economic growth rates are you achieving with the Colombian economy?
In the middle of difficult circumstances, we are reducing our indebtedness. We are adjusting our fiscal balance. When my administration began, we had a public indebtedness over 54% percentage to the GDP. My administration has lowered it up to 44%. The fiscal deficit we found was 4.2%. This year, we are expecting to end the year with a percentage not over 2.5%. In the middle of this battle to adjust our fiscal figures, and in the middle of this battle against terrorism and against drugs, we have had 2 years with economic growth over 4%. And this year, because of the private investment recovery in Colombia, we expect to have a bigger economic growth. I am especially hopeful for the coming years because private investment is only beginning to come again to Colombia. We are at the beginning of what we could call a new opportunity of prosperity for my country.
Mr. President, all around the world, we are facing terrorism. Colombia has faced this for many years, kidnappings and robberies and murders, and yet you have made progress, which you've just outlined, in lowering the incidence of criminality and terrorism. Without getting into other specific issues, are there some secrets, are there some tips, are there some ideas for tactics that the rest of the world could use in very different circumstances to meet these kinds of challenges that you have met and had success with?
More than tips, I will take advantage from this TV space to launch a request to the U.S. community. We need to eliminate illicit drugs. Whenever any U.S. citizen consumes cocaine or marijuana here, he or she is funding terrorist groups in Colombia. We need to defeat drugs consumption everywhere in the world. We need to defeat drugs production, such as the production in my country. Narco trafficking, narco production, narco consumption we need to defeat all these expressions of this criminal activity as a necessary way to win our battle against terrorism. So far, my country has received the reinsertion of 17,000 members of the terrorist groups. My idea is very simple. While they remain in violent activities, the only way my government operates on is by confronting them with all the severity, with all the energy, with all the determination. Once they make the decision to reinsert, to demobilize, my government treats them with generosity.
Mr. President, your neighbor in Venezuela, President Hugo Chavez, is sounding increasingly radical these days. The State Department recently accused the Chavez government of aiding the FARC in Colombia. From the standpoint of the Colombian government, do you see Hugo Chavez and his regime as a threat to Colombia, as a serious problem for Colombia?
In our policy on international relations, we have some key elements. One is prudence, the other is effectiveness. Prudence in our speeches, in my interviews, effectiveness in many aspects. To be effective in the fight against terrorism, we need increasing, growing cooperation from our neighbors. As I stated this afternoon in a press conference with President Bush at his home in Crawford, I said, the threat Colombia suffers could spread to our neighbor countries. When they cannot kidnap in Colombia, they go to any of our neighbors and kidnap there. When they are stopping Colombia, they have no limits. They will do the same. They will produce the same terrorist acts in our neighbors. Therefore, every country bordering with Colombia, every brother country of Colombia has to fight with us against terrorism. Today, to save Colombians, and thinking in tomorrow to save our fellow citizens living in our brother countries.
Mr. President, what we've seen in Latin America over the last couple of years seems to be a move towards the political left, without talking about any specific country, but with reference to, obviously, elections in Brazil, in Argentina, Uruguay, elsewhere. There does seem to be a resurgence of the democratic left. Is this something that is of concern, or how would you explain what is happening in the political life of Latin America?
Latin America has still many problems of poverty, of misery, of unemployment, environmental problems. I consider that we no longer should divide South America, Latin America into leftist and rightist governments. In my opinion, this is an obsolete division. This division was practical by the years of the dictatorships. The way Latin American citizens faced by that time the dictatorships made possible to split them between people of the right and people of the left. Nowadays, while all the countries are submitted, are respectful to the democratic framework, this division is obsolete, is outdated. We need modern democracies, inclusive democracies. We lived democracies generating trust, confidence, and to know whether or not any democracy is a modern one, is creating a real framework for confidence. I have proposed 5 elements to rate democracies. 5 elements to be asked to any democracy to rate it. Democratic security. It is very important to talk not only about the security, but to talk also about democratic security. It is very important in South America to qualify security with the adjective of democratic. Second, freedoms. In the name of security, we have to fortify freedoms instead of suppressing or suspending freedoms. Third, the construction of social cohesion in order to overcome our problems of poverty, of misery. Without social cohesion, it is impossible to make democracy sustainable. Poverty could generate governments from the left, but if poverty is not overcome, therefore, in the afterwards, poverty will destroy democracies. The fourth element is transparency. Transparency in the public affairs. Transparency in the democratic competition. Transparency in the international relationships. And the fifth element is independent institutions. Every modern democracy needs to respect independent institutions as a way to provide citizens, investors, workers with stable and transparent rules. Without institutions, with independence within the state, it is impossible for the people to become confident.
Some human rights organizations have criticized your government's law for demobilizing armed combatants and former drug traffickers and that sort of thing as for allegedly letting off too easily those individuals who have committed serious abuses of human rights. I know you've heard this criticism before. What's your response?
This government has seen that the mobilization of 17,000 members of the terrorist groups. This is a huge number.
All of them, not just one, right?
No. They have come
from the various groups.
From the various groups. So far, 65% of them, roughly speaking, have come from the paramilitary groups. The other 35% from the guerrilla groups. And we are giving the same treatment to all of them. While they remain in violence, we confront them with all the energy. At the moment they make the decision to reinsert, we receive them with generosity. At the end of the year, Colombia could have over 20,000 demobilized people. At the beginning of my administration, my country had over 50,000 members of the terrorist groups. Imagine this problem. With 180,000 hectares of illegal drugs to finance their activities. It is the major risk any country can see. Therefore, as a consequence of our severe policy on security, these people are making the decision to demobilize, and we need a legal framework. This is the reason we have enacted this new law. First, this law is for all the groups. Second, this law has a balance between peace, justice, and reparation for the victims. In the past, when my country enacted laws similar to this one, the only concern was to enact a law for reconciliation. We in the past gave amnesty or pardon to criminals convicted for serious crimes. This law has introduced two very important concepts: justice and reparation to the victims. Those responsible for serious crimes won't have amnesty, won't have pardon. They will have reduced sentences without amnesty, without pardon. Under our Constitution, they cannot be elected members of Congress. This law is very strict. Some of the critics see this law very soft in regarding the paramilitary groups, but very strict when they consider the real leaders of guerrillas. In the worldwide, this has been a very important law. If you compare this law with the legislation of South Africa, even with the legal decisions made in Great Britain after the Good Friday Agreement of the year 1998, you see that this law in Colombia is much more stricter than the laws those countries enacted to solve their problems. This law does not weaken extradition. My government has a record on extradition. Under my administration, I have issued orders to allow the extradition of more than 350 Colombians because of their participation in illicit drug businesses.
Who were under indictment in the United States and wanted for drug trafficking offenses.
Of course. 2 weeks ago, we saw the figures of the number. I have already referred to you. 270 have been extradited to the United States in the 3 years of my government.
And it's important to remember that this was the biggest issue and the biggest point of conflict in 10 years ago between the United States and Colombia, the ability to extradite these criminals, and that's changed. Let me change the topic for a bit. We all know that the world is heading into, and is indeed in, a real problem, perhaps even a crisis relating to energy. Colombia is a country with considerable energy resources. Are you looking for foreign investment or private investment to help develop those resources?
Of course, of course. We have introduced excellent improvements in our energy policy. Last night I had a meeting with investors in the energy sector in Houston, and I asked Chairman Raymond of Exxon. Exxon is one of the international investors that has come back to Colombia again. And I asked, Mr. Chairman, let me know, what is the reason for you to having made this decision to go back to Colombia again? Oil prices or our policy? His answer was, your policy. Because when we are drilling a well, we don't know at what price we will sell the oil produced by this well. Therefore, our decision should be made based more on policies than on price expectations. Colombia has 87% of its territory that has not been explored yet. We are in the middle of two rich oil countries, Venezuela and Ecuador. And many people ask, why Colombia not? Because Colombia needs more exploration. and great investors are coming back to Colombia, fortunately. 87% without exploration in Colombia. This is a problem, but more than a problem, this is a great opportunity to go to Colombia to look for oil. And Colombia is exporting a huge amount of coal. This year, Colombian coal exports will pass the number of 55 million tons. We are finding a growing number of gas reserves. And we have all the potential to develop hydroelectrics.
Bob?
Mr. President, is there more that the United States, in your view, could be doing and should be doing to help Colombia in its fight against, in our fight against narco-traffickers and against terrorism and subversion?
2 points. First, 2 state accords with Plan Colombia. President Bush announced this afternoon.
State accords, you say.
State accords to continue the United States policy to help Colombia. President Bush announced this afternoon his decision to request from Congress the approval of budget portions in the coming fiscal years for Colombia to state accords. It is a key element of this policy. Second, it is very important to pay special attention to the free trade agreement the United States negotiates with the Indian countries at this moment, with Colombia. Because in the case of agriculture, Colombia needs market access to the United States. And of course, Colombia buys a lot of products in the industrial sector, in the agribusiness sector, from here, from the United States. But it is very important to consider this special element. When our legal agriculture prospers in Colombia, illicit drugs stand down.
Recently, the Colombian Congress passed a law amending the Constitution that will allow you to be the first president to run for re-election, or at least the first president in modern times. Could you talk about that decision, your personal decision to submit yourself to another period of what must be great stress? When is the election going to be, and what's your prediction?
Quite a difficult topic. I cannot speak about elections. The final decision depends on the Constitutional Court. My decision for a while is to work every hour to comply with my duties. And I ask my God to give me the opportunity to serve my country whenever He provides, until the final day of my life. Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.